Well, to return now to Rahm Emanuel, just up to fill in the gaps in his story. White House chief of staff, and then his next big job was mayor of Chicago, which he just departed from that job.
He fixed all the problems.
He
can ride off into the sunset.
I mean, he did preside over a murder cover up and probably the worst major police force in America, which is really saying something in the Chicago PD.
Mass closing of public schools. Let's not forget
that's also good. So Rahm
operated some kind of churning machine meant to grind up the poor and turn Chicago from. Well, it's like I guess we never released the footage from our Chicago live show, so people won't understand this reference. But tried to turn the city from this horrifying maelstrom of violence that Airbnb host warned us about into like some kind of like Disneyfied Times Square.
World-class city. That was his phrase.
World-class city. You can see sort of evidence of the things Rahm does believe in, I suppose, in his tenure as mayor. But just recently, just now, immediately out of office, he has immediately got a job as a columnist for The Atlantic.
Of course. God, I love The Atlantic.
And it's just, sort of welcome with open arms.
Neoliberal debeak, I called it, and it's still true.
The liberal media, and, he's the first article he did was like a sort of a pan to Pete Buttigieg, but he was like a contributor then, and he was just like, the point of that article was like, being gay is the least interesting thing about Mayor Pete, and then went on to just talk about like how he's the perfect candidate, and like people need to start taking him seriously. He's the future of the Democratic Party. So now he's officially been hired as a full-time columnist, and I really would love your thoughts on this piece, Ryan, because based on everything we said, like it's incredible. The title of this piece is called "It's Time to Hold American Elites Accountable for Their Abuses."
It's so good. It's so good.
They covered up a murder of someone of a teenager when he was mayor,
and he was involved in it.
Yeah, he was personally involved in it. Oh, and like you pointed this out, that the reporter who broke that story is now waiting tables.
Yeah, he's serving coffee at a hotel in Washington. He's still doing freelance work on the side, but yeah. He's does not have a full-time journalism job. The reporter who broke that story got the video loose from Rahm's hands.
So now Rahm has
and didn't he back a bunch of just these white elephant fucking development projects, like something with DePaul University, some $1 fucking facility obviously like every other big city mayor, like fucking like developers just write their housing policy and all that shit.
Took hundreds of millions of affordable housing money and just wouldn't spend it. He would literally rather not spend the money.
So Rahm is back now with his very cush, high profile byline in The Atlantic, saying that American elites need to be held accountable. And it says here, if Democrats want to address simmering middle class anger, they need to deliver justice. So I just want to read from a couple selections from this piece here.
We must nominate Darkwing Duck.
So he begins by talking about the college admissions scandal. And he says, the outrage over the Varsity Blues investigation perfectly illustrates what may be the most important, least understood, and underappreciated political dynamic of our era. A full-on middle-class revolt against the elites and the privileges they hoard. I mean, a middle-class revolt against sort of decadent elites. They're very angry.
Yeah.
So he goes, the privileges they hoard. For all the focus on inequality and social justice, this middle-class revolt is the most important barrier standing between Democrats and the White House. They can't afford to ignore it. Think of what's happened over the past decade and a half. And now please think about this paragraph in light of what we just talked about with Rahm's career, particularly in the White House. America endured a war sold on false premises, a bailout of bankers issuing entirely toxic debt, and a massive public effort to prop up auto executives who were building cars that weren't selling. Is it any wonder so many middle-class taxpayers resent the elites? The middle class has been forced to bail them out from their own mistakes time and time again, and yet the beneficiaries of that goodwill haven't apologized, let alone taken responsibility. America's middle class is Cinderella, and the nation's elite are her evil stepsisters.
What?
Only now it's the stepsisters who get to marry the prince. It's infuriating.
Oh, that's great writing. I see why they hired him. It clearly wasn't just glad handling and elite, self-promotion. Clearly, they're just like, his prose is too sparkling.
So, I mean, other than the Iraq War, he's hanging.
Which he supported. He ran in 2002 as a pro-war candidate.
So he's saying, like, the problem is, like, and then
which he didn't need to do. This he's running to represent Chicago.
Look, we're not. There's no point talking about who killed who.
But he's saying, like, he's basically hanging the auto bailout and the bailout of the overall of Wall Street of, like,
which was true, especially the Wall Street bailout. Yeah, that was awful, and they didn't need to do it. There's other things they could have done, but there was a couple guys in charge at that time who decided that there was no other alternative.
And as Rahm was saying, he was also shaving hundreds of billions of dollars off the stimulus.
Yeah, and I get into this in the book too, that he was instrumental in one of the biggest scandals around the Wall Street bailout, which was the AIG bonuses.
Ooh,
yeah.
You remember this? Everyone that I talked to who lived through that in the Senate and the House says, like, that's the moment we lost everything. Like, we lost the public right there. They absolutely turned on us, and we took the blame for everything. And this was something that Rahm Emanuel and Tim Geithner pushed for. Chris Dodd, of all people, who was the chairman of the banking committee, wanted to make sure that there were no bonuses anywhere near this bailout. They said no. That appalled them. That's unconstitutional.
It's not fair.
These contracts are sacred. These bonuses are written down on paper. You cannot take them away from these bankers who have worked so hard. So they insisted. They ended up going around Chris Dodd, going directly to a staffer on the committee to get the language changed. They ended Chris Dodd's career over this.
Oh, my God.
Went on to become a lobbyist for Hollywood. So he's fine.
Yeah, now he's at the MPAA. But,
actually, he got run out of there, too.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Oh, man.
He got lost to Jack Valenti's old job?
I forget the beef that ran him out of there.
I mean, to quote Rahm in this paragraph, it's infuriating.
Yeah.
So, skipping ahead here, he also says, maybe the clearest early manifestation was the Iraq War. After 9/11, the Washington elite claimed that the country needed to neutralize Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. Congress and the media largely went along for the ride. But 1 trillion and 5,000 lives and 16 years later, by the way, it's actually quite a bit more than 5,000 lives.
Way more.
And 16 years later,
lives that matter.
Yeah, 16 years later, the public has been told that those weapons of mass destruction had not existed after all. Yet, as clear as that became, no one ever took it on the chin. No one from the Bush administration ever took responsibility. You know why? It's because Obama came into office immediately and said, we're looking forward, not backward, and eschewed any investigations of the run-up to the Iraq War, or let alone prosecutions of any of these people.
And the second that Pelosi won the House in 2006, she said, I'm taking impeachment off the table, if that sounds familiar.
Yeah. Taking impeachment off the wow. I totally forgot. Yeah, this is Nancy's career.
Yeah, she's good.
She should have that on like a little embossed thing on her desk. I'm taking impeachment off the table.
Should be on the floor. Impeachment should be just on her floor.
But like, so Rahm is saying here, like, there's a middle class revolt because of these things that elites perpetrated and caused great catastrophe at huge cost in both, as our favorite thing, blood and treasure for the taxpayer. But like at the time, if you had tried to, let's say, make anyone in the Bush administration or Wall Street take it on the chin, guess who you'd be running up against trying to stop you from doing that?
I was appalled when it looked like Rahm Emanuel might get one of these gigs. And I guess he's already got a gig with ABC, too. It was clear that he was trying to become a
Wait,
pundit.
what's his ABC gig?
Oh, he's going to be a contributor for their news as well.
Oh, I thought he was getting like a sitcom or something.
Yeah, hopefully. we can hope.
The Emanuels, him and his shitty brothers.
Yeah, him and his asshole brothers.
But I've actually flipped on this idea. I think it's delightful that he has this column.
Well, it's good. It's like the perfect, this is the Atlantic. This is what this is perfect. So he goes, middle class families paid both blood and treasure. There's that phrase.
Oh, God, shut
but
the
the
fuck
people who had made the worst foreign policy decision in U.S. history never owned their failure. The same thing happened during the Great Recession. The nation's banking elite had lent billions to home buyers without any realistic hope of making good on their debts. Their irresponsible lending not only precipitated a global financial meltdown, but also necessitated a bailout from the nation's financially stressed middle-class taxpayers. Yet, even after being bailed out, the nation's banking executives never faced any real consequences. No one went to jail. They never had to repay the personal fortunes they'd made by passing out those bad loans. Once again, the middle class was called to bail out the elites who were responsible for the mess, while the elites got off scot-free.
This is so fucking perverse. What a sick puppy. I mean, he's never going to run for office again, presumably. His political career is done.
Right, and he actually floated his name out there for president as one of these 24.
What?
It looks like he's decided against that. But yeah, he was kicking himself around.
Fuck. Well, then never mind. Maybe this is all this is on the Nixonian revamp that is like a long march back to relevance. Because otherwise, why would you write this? Why would you just lie like that? Other than you just getting off on it because you're a little piggy.
Also, he spent about 2 years in the private sector between the White House and running for Congress. And in that time, he earned something like $19 million brokering private deals between people that he'd met while he was at the Clinton White House and shaking down nuclear power companies for money. Like he walked away with an extraordinary amount of money. Who knows what he's worth now? If he had $19 million, that he made in a year in 1999.
Well, look, he's not a fat cat. He's a middle-class taxpayer.
Right, middle class.
So
his constant use of middle class is just so 90s.
So he goes, Washington wasn't wrong to prevent a global financial meltdown. Obama was certainly right to save the domestic auto industry.
Against my advice.
But those decisions came at a real cost. After the Recovery Act had passed and the auto bailout was rolling, we had a fierce debate inside the White House about how to sequence our pushes for healthcare, climate change, and financial reform. As the White House chief of staff, I argued unsuccessfully that the American people needed the catharsis of seeing that the bankers who had gotten the country into this mess were being forced to take responsibility, that faith in government would plummet if we failed to deliver some Old Testament justice.
Yeah, he was in there saying stone these guys to death.
Yeah.
Can I just pause?
I don't think that's true. I think he might be lying.
Can I just pause and say nobody actually gave a shit about the auto bailout?
No, not the auto bailout.
Right.
Other than people who loved it in the state of Michigan.
People who loved it, like you said, bought in the state of Michigan.
Right.
Outside, of course, of the racial dog whistles about Detroit.
Yeah.
So here goes. I'm just skipping ahead. But he goes here. Democrats have become increasingly cognizant of the anger, but too often, this middle-class anger, he goes, but too often they've drawn the wrong conclusions. The answer certainly isn't socialism. Middle-class voters currently...
Shut the fuck up about the fucking middle class. That's not a thing. God damn it.
Middle-class voters certainly presume that elites already control the government, so why would they want to give the bureaucracy any more power? Rather, Democrats need to become the party of justice. They need to demand accountability from bad actors and point out where Republicans would give them a pass. Every time Democrats look at a problem, they think of a program. And while those programs often point the way forward, Democrats need to focus their energy on convincing the middle class that they share their values more than just their economic interests.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what is it fucking talking about? Does he want to get SEAL Team 6 to just murder Lloyd Blankfein? If he does, I'm fine with that.
I mean, I'd vote for him if
that's
that were the
cool. Case. But he's saying we do that instead of reordering society in any way that's
wait. So we know
Democrat,
when Democrats face a problem, they want to write a solution or something. We need to spend our time convincing the middle class of our values, through podcasting.
You know what this literally sounds like? This sounds like what the Jacobins did with the Reign of Terror. When at least according to Marx. No, I'm serious. Marx's analysis of the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror era was that. Because it was a revolution made up of lawyers and the emerging bourgeois, and it was a class project in that sense. And the productive forces didn't exist for socialism to really, be a viable option. And the people of Paris wanted change. They wanted lives that were good. They couldn't give them that. They didn't have the inclination or ability to create a social order that was just. What they could do is cut off the heads of all the fucking asshole royals and fancy noble people who they hated. And he's basically saying, yeah, just do that instead.
But to Lori Loughlin of Full House.
I guess, yeah.
And it's a version of Joe Biden's solution, which is to take Donald Trump behind the gym and beat him up.
Yeah.
Tom Perez is going to hit somebody with a 2x4. Because, they don't have an actual program, as Rahm Emanuel
And the
says.
thing is, if they wanted to kill people, that would at least be something. But he's clearly not talking about that.
If he wants to give the Chicago Police Department treatment to, Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon, by all means, but something tells me that's not what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is here, he says we need to become a party of justice. in bringing these bad actors to justice. Now, you could disagree with me, but like to my mind, you cannot do anything close to bringing the bad actors in American politics to justice without something that looks like socialism.
Well, you have to make them less powerful, or else they'll just prevent ever being held accountable because they have all the fucking money.
Well, okay, just to finish it out here, it goes, there is more to voters than their wallets. To do that, Democrats need to prove to them that they know the difference between right and wrong.
How? What?
And that begins with owning the terms accountability and responsibility.
Jesus fucking Christ, I'm going to jump out of this goddamn window.
They need to own those terms. Democrats need to be the ones demanding that those who fall short, no matter how privileged, be made to answer for their own decisions.
Theater.
Every one of
go
us
around with a big boot, and we're going to kick them in the boot. We're going to give them the boot. Hey, all you naughty rich people, we're going to give you the boot.
Every one of us should have to live by the same moral and ethical codes. The nation's elite shouldn't have any special license to take the easy way out. And I think it's interesting that he opens the article talking about the college admissions scandal, because I think actually that's what he's talking about. I think he's basically signaling that the Democrats
throw the book
need
at
to
Felicity
fucking
Huffman.
like strap Felicity Huffman and William H. Macy into the electric chair like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg and just throw the switch on these Hollywood scofflaws, because that's the elite he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's not talking about the people who actually have any fucking power or influence in our. Like, he's not talking about putting healthcare executives in the stockades or anything like that. No, he's talking about Lori Loughlin and fucking their shitty influencer daughters.
And I mean, it has to be. I mean, how do you? God damn it! How do you write that? It's breathtaking.
I'm deeply grateful that he wrote this and that he's back in the news, because when I was writing the book, I was like, yes, Rahm's going to be my main character because he's been such an influential figure in the party over the last 30 years. But are people over him? You know, he's been gone from Washington since 2010. Are people not going to care about Rahm Emanuel? Thank you, Rahm, for coming back and showing us who you
he's
are.
bringing it. He's going to be a recurring figure, I think, if he keeps writing shit like this. Because you start with just I hate it when people refer to things that people in public say as gaslighting, because it's just lying. You can only be gaslit by like an intimate partner.
Yeah,
but that. Having his career and then being like, you know what, we really didn't give these elites the what for.
Hey, you know,
and that war.
Yeah, the problem was
that is like the gaslight. I feel like I'm being gaslighted.
The problem is, there's all this Donald, and the weird thing about this is that, like, reading in between the lines here, and actually not even reading in between them, just reading the lines, he's basically blaming Obama for Donald Trump.
Yeah,
which is like, in a way, I kind of agree with that in certain respects, but like. At every level, like
he was there.
It's yourself. You're talking about yourself.
Of his all the worst decisions, and because he was the chief of staff when the only time when they actually had control of the political agenda, and they fucked the dog completely. That was when he was chief of staff. Then they like had that revolving door of like weirdo cat men and like
one of them Daley.
Yeah, one of the Daley's like dipshit brothers who couldn't even get elected. Mayor of Chicago
didn't even make it past the runoff.
Didn't make it into the runoff. A Daley brother couldn't make it into the runoff to be mayor of Chicago. What? How did he get out of his house every day to be fucking chief of staff?
Well, that's Rahm,